We left Thor as he was heading back home after his unhappy experience in Utgarfaloki's hall. He walked some distance, but when he got back to his chariot, his goat was still limping. So he left Fjolvi and Rosvar with the goats, intent on coming back to fetch them at some point. He also left Loki, who had business to finish in Jotunheimr. So Thor was walking on his own towards Asgarth when he came upon a river. The river was deep and the water was cold. Thor wasn't a big fan of crossing it and getting himself soaking wet. He spotted a ferryman on his boat further downstream and called out to him. "Hello there! Who are you?" asked Thor. "Who are you?" asked the ferryman. "I asked first," said Thor. "I asked second," answered the ferryman. This gives you the tone of the whole piece. The lay of Horbarth is technically a senna, i.e. a flighting. In the same way that in the Lokasena, Loki bad-mouths all of the gods, here the ferryman, who, spoiler alerts, will turn out to be Óðinn, and Thor trash each other. It's a show of strength to see who is wittier, who has done the most glorious deeds. The boast battles were a strong Scandinavian tradition. They can also be called Manjafnar. This poem can be found in the Codex Regius and was probably composed around the 10th century. Some scholars think it was improvised as a bit of fun, and the author just wanted to amuse their audience with banter and boasting. Some scholars think it's an allegory of the opposition between nobility, peasantry, symbolized here by Óðinn, for the rich guys, and Thor, for the poor guys. If that is the case, then the piece was probably written in Norway, because the class issue wasn't as important in Iceland at the time, but we can't know for sure. Thor told the ferryman that he would pay him with good food, which he had plenty of in his bag. If only he would carry him across, Thor would give him herrings and porridge. What were we saying about Thor's taste buds in the previous episode? Anyway, the ferryman didn't seem impressed. "You're proud of your food," he said, "but you won't be proud to hear your mum is dead." "My mum is what?" said Thor, shocked. "By Óðinn, I think I would have noticed if my mum was dead. She's the earth. If she was dead, the whole world would be grieving." At that the ferryman laughed, and said Thor was too poor and of too little importance for the death of his mother to make much of a stir. He basically said, "No one cares about you or your family." Thor, who was used to people respecting him, didn't really know what to answer this. Normally people either talked to him properly, or he smashed them over the head with his hammer, but the ferryman was out of reach, and Thor decided to just ignore all the talk about his mother's death, and get back to the most important questions, which were A, who was this guy, and B, why wasn't he letting Thor across? "Who owns the boat you're on?" asked Thor. "The man called Hildolf," said the ferryman, "and he told me to only let honest men across the river, not robbers and rogues." "Who are you? Or are you going to keep changing the subject each time I ask?" Thor reddened and said, "I would never hide my name, for I am not ashamed of it. I am Óðinn's son, Meili's brother, Magni's father. In one word I am Thor, the mighty thunderer." The ferryman grinned and pretended to be impressed, and said his name was Horbarth. Now we're pretty sure Horbarth is Óðinn in disguise. In the Lay of Grimnir, Horbarth is listed as one of Óðinn's names. It's unclear whether Thor recognizes his father or not, because if he did, he probably wouldn't forgive him easily the next time he saw him. But then if he didn't, some of the things he says don't quite make sense. So maybe Thor simply had a strong suspicion of who Horbarth was, but couldn't prove it. Óðinn has many names, and he uses them in many different ways. In total, Óðinn has 170 alternative names that we know of. For the sake of showing off, I shall call him by a different name every single time from now on. Gangleri said, "You can call me Horbarth. I rarely hide my name." Thor was a bit nonplussed by this. "Why do you need to hide it at all? Have you got enemies?" Skigsegr said, "I hide my name from idiots and brutes, so you can be sure I'll hide it from you." Thor raged from the edge of the river, and swore he would come forward and break Bibliography's neck if he could do so without getting his trousers wet. He was a bit worried he would charge towards the boat, then find the current too strong, and find himself stuck struggling in the freezing water. So at least his adventure with Utgarfaloki had taught him to be careful, if nothing else. "I'll come for you," warned Thor. "And I'll wait for you," said Lothungr. "Now that Hrungnir is dead, you'll never find a worthier foe than me." Now this is when the story becomes tough to tell. Because of its structure, this poem consists nearly entirely of references to other stories and myths, most of which we've lost. It's a bit like watching a parody without knowing the original piece. I'll do my best to help you through the references and still keep up the pace. In this case, Hrungnir was a giant with a head made out of stone, whom Thor killed. It's a myth all by itself, which I'll tell you at some point. The reason why Thor had to fight Hrungnir in the first place was because Alford had asked him to race against Sleipnir, and by doing so he had guided the giant straight into Asgard. "You're right to mention Hrungnir," said Thor, "as I kicked his butt gloriously. I brought honour upon all of the Aesir, although it was my stupid dad's fault the giant was in Asgard. I bet you never killed a Jotun." "I've done far more interesting things than kill giants," said Bolverka. Thor wasn't sure there was anything more interesting than killing giants in this world, but he listened on. "For the last 5 winters I was with Fjolvar on the island of Algrön. There I waged war, waded in blood, and got laid." Thor still couldn't see how that was better than Jotun's. What might have escaped Thor, and which we can only speculate upon, was that Ganhardr could have been describing some sort of shamanic initiation. Maybe this strange island and mentor could refer to a ritual, enabling Herjan to access his mystic powers of Galdr. Or it could of course refer to a myth we've lost. Veratyr hadn't finished. He went on. "On the shore of the island were 7 sisters, busy weaving ropes out of the sand." This might be a poetic way to describe the ripple marks waves leave on the beach, implying the sisters were sea goddesses of some sort, maybe the personification of waves. "I seduced all 7 of them. What were you doing while I was enjoying the company of so many fair maidens?" "Let me guess. It involved killing giants." "As a matter of fact," said Thor, "yes, it did. I killed a giant Thjazi and threw his eyes into the sky. Pretty good, huh?" Thor was rather proud of his throw, which had sent both of the Ettin's eyes so far into the sky that they had become stars. "What were you doing when I killed Thjazi?" asked Thor. "Let me guess. It involved women." "As a matter of fact, yes," said Hrafnos. "I convinced witches to leave their husbands for me. Oh, and I convinced Hlibarth to give me his magic wand. That was cool. And then I made him go mad. That was cool too." "Wait, you paid him back for his wand by making him go mad?" "Huh, you're about as good as settling your debts as my dad," said Thor. "Losers weepers," said Grimnir. "Tough luck for him." As we can see, all of Uvra's boastings are linked to women and magic. Women and magic are both obtained through cunning rather than strength, whereas of course everything Thor does is kill giants. "What were you doing while I was busy gaining money, riches and girls?" asked Igor. "Wait, don't tell me, let me guess. You were killing giants. Lots and lots of forgettable giants." "It's important to kill Jotun," said Thor hotly. "If it weren't for me, there wouldn't be humans left in Midgard." Which is why Thor is called the protector of Midgard and the protector of men. By killing giants, Thor makes the earth fit for humans to live in. "While you were fighting, I was in Valand," said Fimbultyr. "I was on the battlefield getting new warriors for my hall. You might be the protector of men, but all the warriors who die are for Feng. You only get to keep the slaves." "You grouchy old man, you're just a stingy god who never shares the humans out evenly." "Who are you calling stingy, you wimp? I heard you cowered in Skrimir's glove, frightened out of your wits by snoring." "If I could reach you, I'd wring your neck," shouted Thor. Now, to be fair, Thor could always have thrown Mjolnir. After all, it came back to his hand. Even if his aim was pretty bad, he should have been able to hit Fjolsvivar in the end, but apparently he didn't think of that. Atrefa, on the other hand, did calm down after seeing Thor go purple. After all, he wanted to tease his son, but he didn't want to make him angry enough to brave the water. Gestumblindi backed down. "I'm only repeating what I heard, not trying to upset you. Don't get your socks wet over a misunderstanding. Tell me of your other glorious deeds." They continued their boast battle along the same lines. Thor said he'd killed more giants, Svaragan's son this time, while he was defending the river Eithing, which flows between the land of the Aesir and the land of the Jotun. Hnikar said he'd made love to a giantess, which happens in so many myths it's impossible to know which one he was referring to. Thor then said he had to fight women on the island of Hlisey. "Fighting women? Lame," said Sangetal. Thor quickly added that the women were Ulfhedin. Ulfhedin are, like berserkers, people who fight without armor, possessed by the spirit of a fierce animal when they battle. Berserkers traditionally are possessed by bears, whereas Ulfhedin are possessed by wolves. Thor called the women he fought she-wolves, more beasts than women. He added they were vicious enough to drive away Fjolvi, so they were at least frightening enough for a 10-year-old human boy to run away. Biflindi then said he had been busy raising war on Midgard. After all, there's nothing like a good war to get a few dead warriors into the Valhalla. At this, Thor snapped. You know I'm the protector of Midgard, right? If you're killing humans, you owe me. Sigfovar only laughed. Yeah, right, I forgot. No one else can play with your precious little humans. Look, I can't give them back, but take my ring as compensation. Now, for some reason, Thor took this really badly. Scholars are not sure why. I've read theories that Thor is offended that people assume he might fall for bribery, but paying men with rings and riches was the rightful behaviour for a chieftain. A kenning for chiefs is the ring bearer, the ring giver, so there is no reason to be offended by such a present. Maybe we're missing a stanza here, or maybe there's another reference we can't get. I guess we'll never know why Thor felt so insulted. You trash people like you were born to look down on them, said Thor. He was still offended, but he couldn't help admiring Valthover. Did you follow a course on how to jeer at me or what? Everything I know. I learnt it from the men old enough to have homes under the earth, said Olgr proudly. When Thor looked at him blankly, he had to explain that homes under the earth were graves, so men old enough to live in graves were the dead, because as he was a magician he received whispered wisdom from the dead and— "Ah, come on, Thunderer, you're supposed to understand this and say how smart I am, not give me this dead-eye look. You're even dumber close up." "If it wasn't for the water," growled Thor, "I'd make you howl louder than wolves." At this, Siddhartha smiled. "It's not me you should be worried about. If I were you, I'd keep an eye on Sif." "What? What's she got to do with anything?" asked Thor. Gondlir pretended to be coy all of a sudden, and teased Thor as he let out the information, drop by drop. "That's the thing with always leaving for Jotunheimr for days on end. Girls get bored. I'm pretty sure you're Sif's husband and Meli's brother. But have you checked if you're really Magni's dad? It may be possible that the unfinished business Loki had in Jotunheimr consisted in getting to Asgard well before Thor, so as to enjoy some time there without the Thunderer to get in his way. After all, this information seems to be consistent with what Loki says at the Lokasena. Just saying." "Look, I've wasted enough time," growled Thor. "Just get me over the river." "What about no?" said Har. Thor raged and stamped his foot on the ground, but for all his anger he didn't want to go into the cold water. So in the end, he just asked Thrazar to show him a road around the river so he could get back to Asgard before the end of the day, because if they kept on arguing, he would never get home. Herr Teitr gave him complicated directions which only sent Thor all the way back to Earth, where he could ask his mum for the way back to Asgard. It was an incredible waste of time, which seemed to have no other point than poke fun at Thor as much as possible. There is some debate whether the last sentence should be attributed to Thor or to Hrothgar's, but there is no doubt about the spirit of the ending line, which concludes the verbal fight between our two Aesir. I hope the trolls eat your brains. I hope you like this episode. I really struggled to give you all of Odin's names. I hope the pronunciation is alright. Next time we'll have Thor getting back to Asgard, but that's not the end of his problems. See you in 2 weeks!